So here we have a bunch of the eminent individuals that have worked on the Blink project. And so this is an open Q&A. So we have a few questions that have been submitted in advance, but what we really want is you guys just kind of raise your hand and shout out your question. I'll repeat for the recording, and then we'll let people take it freely. So to get started, we're going to have the speakers go down the line and introduce themselves so we all know who's who. So why don't we start at the end? Jochen?
Hi, I'm Jochen. I work on V8 and Chrome security from Munich.
Hi, my name is Laslo Gombos. I work for Samsung and I hack on Blink.
Hi, I'm Alex Komoroske. I'm the product management lead on the Chrome side for web platform stuff. I work in Mountain View.
I'm Philip, work for Opera Software. Work mostly on media stuff inside Blink and other core stuff.
Hi, I'm Doug Stockwell. I work at Google Sydney on animations and style.
Hey, I'm Kinuko, coming from Tokyo. I've been mainly working on worker and service worker stuff, and recently I started also working on loading stuff.
Hi, I'm Chris. I work here in San Francisco on Paint.
I'm Dimitri. I make really pretty slides. Next time, just ask me. Exactly. That's it.
Okay, so I'll read off one of the questions that have been submitted to get us started, and then we'll open up to live questions. So the first question is, what are the areas in which we see our competitors are doing better, and maybe which we can improve?
Well, I think memory usage is one of them. WebKit uses much less memory than Chromium does. I don't know about Edge. I think Firefox probably uses less as well. It's pretty safe to say that Chromium is using the most memory. That's my guess.
I heard rumors of amazing compat and conformance test suites on Edge. Would love to have that. That would be really nice.
Okay. Do we have any live questions to get started? Don't be shy. Yeah.
I was typing it in the form. So it's kind of like a generic high-level question. So one of the goals of Web Platform and Blink is, and partially JavaScript, is kind of we want to enable developers to very simply, without shooting themselves in the foot, build great applications which are performant and look great and so on. It seems like the same goal stands between in front of other platforms and languages. It just they don't build websites, like the developers don't build websites, but they want build great Windows applications and so on. So why are we different? Why we believe we will succeed where all other combinations of platforms and languages I think still kind of failing, because we still have high-paid developers who know how to not shoot themselves in the foot, and we have lots of badly written applications and so on.
So to try and summarize the question, we work hard to try and enable people to not shoot themselves in the foot when building for our platform, but we see that this is true of all platforms have the same problem. And what do we think we can do kind of differently, I guess? Or why do we think that we can reach this bar of, fewer foot guns when other platforms also haven't managed to hit that bar terribly well?
I think it's good just to have not more foot guns, and then we'll be okay. I think it's okay to have a website that we think is ugly and someone else thinks is okay, because one person's perfection is another person's not perfection.
So I think there's always going to be foot guns, and the older the platform is and the more different people sort of working on it over history, the more foot guns you're going to have just littered throughout. And getting rid of those foot guns is definitely a good thing. We should do that. But one of the reasons that people have flocked to the web historically to build, developers to build stuff, is not because it's the best platform. It kind of sucks, actually, in that respect. It's because you write something and you can get it out to people and they can tap on a link and they can load it instantly, no matter if they're using Chrome or Opera or Edge or what have you. And that's enormously powerful. So people don't come to the web because it doesn't have footguns. They come to the web because of this incredibly low friction that leads to extremely high reach that has empowered a number of business models that wouldn't work without that. So like we should definitely be working to shave down some of those footguns for sure as we observe them. And that's why I'm so excited about a lot of the focus on quality and interoperability and just sort of getting rid of those footguns. But I don't know.
So I'm not sure if I understand the question. Is your thinking something like that every platform has to grow more and more complex until it's too complex to actually improve and then just dies? Or what's in the question here?
Well, I think
You said other platforms also don't do it, or do you mean that other platforms are also failing in the same way, or?
I think we like this community believes more into like the existence of a silver bullet, you know, like for software development using the web. At least that was my impression, and I think like Alex and Chris kind of said it's not like my impression is not true. So we're just trying to not screw up, basically.
It's a good recipe usually.
Yeah.
Yeah, I think that's right. Oh, his clarifying comment was he had the impression that, well, why don't you say it into the microphone?
Yeah, sorry. So my impression was that people who work on web platform believe more that we can create this silver bullet that enable people just write very simple but great applications. So I just wondered why, you know, we think we're different from other SDKs and platforms.
Yeah, I think I agree with Alex that I don't think we should aim to have some magical jump in productivity other than the fact that it is so much easier to do some of those things like linking and spitting out some content that seems to draw on the page. Dimitri referred to that yesterday at the keynote, like, oh my God, it does something even though you didn't close your divs. That sort of thing. And yeah, and remove footguns when we see them.
Okay, yeah, since you're in the front row.
Speaking of magical leaps in productivity, Elliot just gave us a talk about a big refactoring in Blink. And here we are at BlinkOn 5, and it sounds to me like an awesome thing that was the original premise for why we were doing the Blink fork in the first place. Why did it take us 5 conferences to get here? And is there something we can change to be more productive ourselves?
So I wasn't around for the day. So past promises don't apply to me. But I imagine there's more than that reason. Another reason is just that we can remove abstraction layers that are not necessary due to multiple browsers using the Blink APIs and having them be fixed, and just like faster iteration on things in some cases. But also, like, it took 5 BlinkOns in part because nobody wanted to do 3-sided patches times 100 interfaces as opposed to just 100 interfaces. But also, I think we're sort of like, we've gotten a lot better about long-lived teams and thinking about quality of software and interfaces and things more than in the past, which I think is just something that I observe happens generally with software, that you sort of learn from past mistakes and try to do better next time in all the areas, not just CR bug count, but also interfaces. So,
yeah, to strengthen fit on top of that, I think before this project used to be run by a lot of heroes. There's a lot of heroic effort required to get a lot of things done. And I think over this past year, we've gotten a lot more organized about the long-term health of different areas. I think that's a mark of a mature project, that we can actually think holistically across the entire code base as opposed to these little campaigns of heroism.
So I want to add that there's also a lot of stuff we did during the last years. You know, like maybe you remember the times where you couldn't do anything with a resource request that could not transparently go through CF network because reasons. And so I think there was a lot of craft we ripped out over the years, and it's like, as Chris said, it's just that we're now in a position that we can actually do or iterate on these changes much faster than we could before. but not like all the effort that went into the modularization that was done in the past. So it's not like all of a sudden we realized we could refactor the code base, and it's just that we finished actually a lot of big projects before.
Okay, yeah.
Go
so
team.
question at the back. So what's the minimum number of years we expect Blink to still be around? And what do we hope to achieve over those years?
Blink will live forever.
Yeah, so what are the kind of very long-term goals that we have? Like, where do we see this in a number of years' time?
Well, I don't know a number of years, but if you look at the history of browser engines, then I think all of the ones who have been had a majority user share, Netscape turned into Gecko, IE turned into Edge, and now Chrome. Well, is it going to survive for another 20 years? Probably. I mean, the engines you wouldn't expect to be around in 20 years are the ones who aren't the biggest ones. So it seems pretty likely to me, at least. It also depends what you mean. I mean, the source will be around. Just will anyone compile it?
So there were also a few talks that had kind of like visions that are for the next year, next few years. Like Alex gave this overview of outstanding issues in the FIS API that gives you kind of like an idea where we're going. The onion soup that Elliot just presented is surely something that is more in the range of a year of work than a week of work. So yeah, like if you didn't have the time, I encourage you to check out the videos from the main sessions, because I think there's a lot of like at least next year kind of planning and goals in there.
So my prediction is that 10 years from now, we'll still be talking about code excellence and fixing interrupt bugs. Sorry, it's still going to be happening. Might be different people though, but you know, it's the same. As far as the actual like long-term vision thing, I think looking forward a year is already pretty sketchy, because despite the fact that this is a really large platform, corpus of the web, turns out things shift and change, and we need to stay adaptive to it rather than sticking to some 5-year plan. And as a Russian, I'm very familiar with the 5-year plans. So my thinking is that this is a long-term thing. We're in it for a long haul, and we need to treat it like this. We don't need to stress over, oh my God, this took so long. And celebrate instead that we are making progress, and it's step by step. And as long as we take care of the user and pay attention to listen, experiment, repeat, and don't screw up, we're going to be okay.
By the way, Dimitri, what is the penalty for screwing up?
You get to work on interrupt bugs.
So I think the long-term question is interesting, especially given the talk that Alex Russell did earlier today about kind of progressive web apps, and looking at examples like the Flipkart app that we saw recently. That if you haven't checked out, you definitely should. It seems like we're at a point where technologies are enabling a kind of fundamentally different kind of experience on the web. Does that change how we think about the long term of Blink? Like, should we be leaning into different things now we've seen that direction that's kind of fundamentally different to what we've had in the past?
I think it's really hard to know where things will be 3 years from now, but we can look at those long-term trends. And I think that the progressive web apps terminology that Alex Russell came up with, I think is a really good fit for what I'm starting to see a bunch too, talking to a lot of companies and developers. And I think Flipkart Lite is a really good example of it, where just, it kind of like Ajax was a bit, where it just sort of set the bar higher and told everybody as a web developer, like, you can strive for more, and users started expecting more. I think we're on, it feels like we're at the same kind of moment with things like service worker and push notifications and add to home screen and others. But I don't know exactly how people will use them. I think it was interesting watching how Flipkart architected their Flipkart Lite, because it made sense when I saw it, but I wouldn't have thought that's how you would have done it, I guess. And so ultimately, as people explore how to use these new technologies, it might mean that we have to optimize different use cases and things. It's not really clear yet how they'll all use all this.
Okay, yeah, Miguel. Yeah, so the question is around browsers in emerging markets like UC that don't respect specs and just kind of do whatever they want that they think makes a better user experience. So I guess what should we do about it, and how much should we be worried about it?
So I think you see this when web developers aren't showing a better way, that they aren't building things that require cutting-edge browsers that are modern and have all these new features. So I think Flipkart Lite is a great example where it works in browsers that support service workers, which are today Chromium-based browsers, Opera and Chrome. Hopefully very soon, those will ship. They're working on shipping service workers. And I think that the user experience for that, for the Flipkart Lite, and watching people on Twitter respond to it is just so far better than what they would get in other browsers that don't support some of these cutting-edge technologies, that I think that it will continue to apply pressure to some of these browsers that aren't focusing on improving the web platform and making it a solid platform.
Implicitly, the biggest threat that I see in the browsers that muck with the pages indiscriminately is that they turn away developers. And the developers choose to not do the web because it's such a randomizing experience to try to develop for the platform. So, and I think Alex is somewhere in the right that, you know, as long as we offer a better path, you know, we have a light at the end of the tunnel somewhere. I think that's the way we work with that. And of course, reach out and talk and see.
That's one thing that talking to developers in India or hearing about conversations with them that I was hearing again and again and again is frustration with these lowest common denominator browsers that completely muck with the things that they built and provide a really bad user experience. And developers really want something where they can build a good experience for their users.
Yeah. So I feel I'd like to say something here, perhaps not so. So, I mean, Opera Mini, I think, is the biggest browser in this category, right? And it's running Presto, an engine that we don't develop anymore. And also, it mucks with the pages. But the thing is that we can't. It's hard to take that niche with a on-client browser. It just takes way too much memory. So, unless you can shrink the memory consumption of Chromium by 90% or something, it's really, and the APK size by 90%, it's really a tough market to do anything about. You just kind of have to wait out the hardware to get better. And the thing is that in these markets where Opera Mini is dominant, I mean, obviously pages just adapt to it, so they will work. They won't use a lot of dynamic stuff. And that's really sad in a way, because all the new cool stuff is stuff that just can't work on that model. Yeah.
So sorry, to be clear, I was not trying to like imply Opera Mini. There's others I think that are not such good assistants.
Yeah. So just to repeat that, so I think the point was that there are these mini browsers that do kind of server-side rendering, and they're in a fundamentally kind of screwed up environment. But there are some browsers like UC, the non-mini version, which run on like Android One devices and could have run Chrome, but they still screw with the page.
Oh, so we have old WebKit-based browsers that run in the client, not proxy browsers. Yeah. Oh, I didn't know those existed.
Okay, yeah. So the question is, on the web, we want to provide more kind of native level capabilities, but then fundamentally bad people can do bad things with more power. So how do we balance this tension of giving more power without creating more bad experiences?
I think this is one of the fundamental tensions of the web. Because ultimately, when you talk to very smart developers who are asking for very specific things, they make such a compelling case for why they should get an API. But fundamentally, we have to the security model of the web requires us to effectively assume that every bit of content is malicious, either actively or implicitly or what have you. And the good news is I think that watching, for example, Service Worker and push notifications, it's possible to carve out a meaningful chunk that allows good developers to accomplish good things while preventing actively malicious developers from accomplishing bad things. But in many cases, you still give developers a lot of rope that they might use to, for example, hang themselves or their users. That got kind of morbid, but and I think that's why we have to just be intentional and understand the implications of some of the APIs that we're exposing to people. But I think that by the way, this fundamental tension is actually also why the web has such low friction. So one of the reasons that is that nobody's afraid to tap on a link because the worst that can happen to them isn't that bad. And that's a fundamental driving force of a lot of the power of the web. And so it's not like oh crap, we got stuck with this stupid thing, we have to assume everyone's malicious. That's actually good. It makes it much harder to design, makes it possible for developers to do some stuff that doesn't seem great. But that's, we can't just choose not to have that. It's fundamental to it.
Okay, yeah, question over here. Yeah, so browsers are big bits of code with big API services, and that they just keep getting bigger. How do we deal with that? Can we introduce more modularity, componentization?
So there are some features which we could load on demand, and like for example, media codecs. If the website doesn't have any kind of media elements, there's basically no reason other our sandbox that requires us to load all the media codecs right at process creation, right? So and the parts of the code base where we experiment a bit with a Mojo, like especially the HTML viewer component, that would enable doing more decisions about what you actually ship, right? So that there's one thing loading the thing at runtime. If you're in a position that you can decide what you want to load, you could also be like, okay, you know, here's a really small browser. It has all the HTML5 things, right? But if you use some of them, you need to do a conscious decision to actually download that component. And yeah, so I hope we can also, like with the onion soup thing, go more into the direction that there are clearly defined modules, and like if you add something new, you might do it in such a way that it's like if it's built on top of like a web modules API that's pretty similar to our to the DOM API we expose. You could imagine a world where we download or load those parts of the web platform on demand, and making it possible to ship like a default browser that is not just slimmed down and you're stuck with something that can't display all of HTML5, but it's just like the initial download will be faster. But it's just like one direction. It's kind of, yes, it's a challenge and we need to think about it, but I think it's not like we're stuck with an ever-growing browser and there's no way out.
Let's not forget that we already have a solution to this problem. It's called layered platform, and we've been driving that truck for a long time. And the idea is that you stop adding ad hoc high-level features and instead concentrate on exposing primitives. You dig in instead of, you know, piling on. And you expose things like custom paint because you know the developers will never run out of demands of high-level features to paint fancy borders. And you expose things like custom layout because you know that you can spend years, literally years, probably close to decades now, working out Flexbox bugs through the standards body. Whereas the actual use cases for Flexbox layout the developer cares about, on average, is incredibly simple. And I think that's the answer for a more like a sustainable future for us. Is every time we are tempted to ship a feature, we need to say, does this really justify the cost of adding this code base? And otherwise, we need to look in and say, can we expose it in terms of primitives? Ocean is going to stand up and yell.
I just wanted to say, like, we're attacking that on multiple fronts in practice. So Elliot just gave this talk about how we're like layering the internal C++ system. He sort of hinted at like, the nice thing is that the system layer will be primitives that we build the platform on top of. Maybe we'll expose some of those to web authors, but even if we don't, we can write the specs in terms of those primitives, and then the platform is built in a layered way. So even the more scary things, we can build like a nice modular web platform instead of the spaghetti we have today. And then, as Dimitri said, on the other front, we're exposing specific primitives with the like custom star APIs. Sorry? Yeah.
I think most of the things are already answered, but I also wanted to say that well, I've been in Chrome team for some time now, and I'm feeling guilty for adding like dead code. So I've implemented kind of file system API, which is now not a part of the standard, and like many people are asking that what we are doing, like we will unship the feature or like something like that. But kind of like having modularity or like a dynamic loading system is one of our dream, and I think we keep kind of talking about that. And there are several answers probably. Like implementation-wise, we could probably someday maybe like implement something like dynamic loading, or like API layer. We try to expose more lower layer API so that we won't make any random high-level API. And also, we start working on like a kind of experimental framework so that when we come up with seemingly good API, we could start with experimental. And if it doesn't look good, or like it like ends up like going having bad end, then we could probably just unship in an experimental way. So that I think we are in a very good direction.
Okay, yeah.
So one way that web developers deal with this problem of web being hard to succeed, create performant experience, is to essentially use a subset. So it's like AMP. So they use maybe 10 features of the platform that work really good. So is this a good strategy for the platform builder to embrace? Essentially work on this subset of features that are really good and just kind of push those forward.
So the question is, we've seen a few movements just to use a very small subset of the web platform, like AMP, that uses a very small subset of the elements. So is that a good strategy for us as platform developers to focus on a small set of kind of core things rather than a wide platform?
I think it's really hard to figure out what the right subset is. It's easy to talk about that, but it's hard to get it exactly right. Maybe like, this is the 10 that you need, and then you put it out for developers and they go, oh, but I can't use that because I need this piece over here. And it's too late at that point. So I think if things like AMP and others that use a subset of the platform become very popular among developers, that might be something to teach us what things are not as important. But it's very hard to imagine for me how we would like experimentally like guess which bits you actually need. That's one thing I find talking to various web developers at various companies. I constantly am surprised when you go to them and you're like, oh, okay, you look at their website, like they're doing this one thing wrong. They have no idea what they're doing. You go talk to them, and they actually have a very coherent reason why they're doing it that way. That blows your mind a little bit. It makes total sense once you know it. And so it's very difficult for us to know which pieces are really important to developers, I think.
It's also, we've learned in the past that it's really, I mean, like at a point where say you concentrate on a certain subset, like the logical conclusion is you rip out the rest, right? And like, even if you don't rip it out and you don't concentrate on it, it'll become worse. Websites that rely on these features will become worse. And you know, like one of the strengths of the web is like this very long tail, which we also want to support, right? So we've seen in the past by ripping out stuff like show model dialogue that's really disruptive to a certain set of websites. Like it's not like they could or won't easily move to something shiny new, but instead they'll just be broken in Chrome. And so I think it's important to like, you know, there are ugly parts in the platform which we don't like, or there are things which are more difficult to implement, but they're in the platform, and interop and compatibility is one of the strengths of the web. And so we should not like just drop them just because they're not the fastest.
Yeah, so it's a bit hard for me to think of cases where promising to not hit this weirdo code path is actually going to allow some kind of fast path, because like, mostly if you don't use the APIs, then, well, you don't use them, but that doesn't allow any other kind of optimization. So yeah, I have a hard time seeing it, I guess.
Since you said it, I have to answer that one. The HTML parser we built, so we sort of forked Blink at one point and tried building like an alternative, like slimmed down platform. We built this HTML parser that I suspect would work on like the vast majority of HTML content. That was 20x faster, 22x faster. And it removed the stuff like you can't do like misnested DOM, and you can't do like misnested tags. You can't do.
You have to close your divs, right?
You have to close your divs, yes. Like that sort of stuff that like not very much content really depends on. You could imagine having an opt-in for something like that if we found that HTML parsing was like a big part of the performance, like hit on content.
Okay, so unfortunately we have a hard stop on time, so we're going to have to finish there. But of course we'll be moving over for the reception, so feel free to keep bombarding these guys and each other with questions. Yeah, so we'll all be heading out downstairs and across to the same place we were last night. So before we finish, I just want to say a quick thank you to the organizers and to the AV folk that have helped, so round of applause. And just before I ask you all to run out of the room, I'm going to hand over to Dimitri quickly.
Oh. I have a mic. So it's me again. Thank you so much for coming. This was amazing. I'm inspired. I think there's a bunch of inspiration happened too. Are you inspired as well? Yes? Woo! You know, in for a long haul, don't screw up. What else did we learn? Listen, repeat, experiment. I can't remember what order that thing is. And the onion soup, of course, that's the important part of the, you know, and performance insights, right? All of these things. And Kenji's ads analysis, do you remember that one? That was really cool. Everybody, thank you so much for coming. I wish we had like a ceremonial hat or like some object to pass over to the next BlinkOn, but I'm just gonna call out Jochen. He's going to be organizing the next one, and it's going to be in a mysterious place in Europe, from what I understand, somewhere. And so this is going to be in the summerish or springish, late spring of 2016, and see you then. So good luck, and let's do amazing stuff in 2016.